Joining us now on the Michael Brooks Show is returning champion, regular guest, friend, paisan, everything good. She's a co-host and executive producer on The Young Turks. She's also the host of No Filter, which is an incredibly good YouTube and podcast show, which you should be subscribing to directly. Anna Kasparian. Anna, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Anna, why should we impeach the MFer?
Well, for me, the strongest argument and what's persuaded me that impeachment is the right way to go about this is that it's important to maintain and sustain our system of checks and balances. And when the president breaks a law and it's a significant crime, we need to ensure that Congress holds that individual accountable for his or her actions. So in this case, Donald Trump reached out to a foreign leader in an effort to get this individual to investigate and dig up dirt on his political opponent. And if the tables were turned and we had a Democrat in office, first off, I would argue that people on the left, myself included, would want the same actions by Congress. But more importantly, Republicans wouldn't just let that person off easily. Republicans would investigate the situation over and over again until they got exactly what they wanted. And so in this case, my main frustration has been just the utter weakness of the Democratic leadership. The fact that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, kowtow to the right wing, the fact that they're so afraid to ever hold anyone on the right accountable for their actions. Go back and look at the Obama administration and the number of investigations that congressional Republicans launched into his administration. I mean, night and day. The comparison is insane because you just really see how incredibly weak Democrats are. For me, this isn't about, I hate Trump and I want him out of office. For me, this is about the rule of law, and this is about holding someone in a position of power accountable for his actions.
Word. And I I don't know whether you're moving in and out of rooms, but just like make sure your phone is held up really clearly so people can hear you 100%. So I agree with everything you've just said, particularly on the political difference between Republicans and Democrats. What about the concern that, I did a commentary where I was really trying to thread a needle between the fact that, I agree with you. And I think even if you have a really radical political stance, it is incredibly naive to pretend that the institutions here do not serve some function, including protecting some really important things, even if they're corrupted and discredited and hypocritical and everything that we all know, right? I remember when I had I had a couple of minutes to talk to Fernando Haddad, who was the person who ran in Lula's place for the Workers' Party when he was in New York a couple of months ago. And actually, things have not gone quite as bad as they could have, at least in the first year of Bolsonaro. But he was saying, look, you guys have circuit breakers going back hundreds of years in the States. We don't have that here. Our Constitution was in the 1980s. We have much weaker institutions. So institutions definitely matter. And at the same time, I think that even just the context around the story, right? It's what Trump thinks Biden did is a discredited conspiracy theory, but Joe Biden's kid getting a $50,000 board seat is real. And it is swamp, and it is dysfunction, and it is systemic corruption. So do you think there's a little bit of for the American public sort of eye roll of here comes the smelling salts, partially because they already know Donald Trump is Donald Trump, and also because they have a more maybe systemic cynicism about everybody in politics?
Yeah, so let me start my answer to your question by saying that this whole story makes me realize how much I can't stand the lack of nuance in a lot of the discussions that take place on various political issues. So is there corruption behind the fact that Joe Biden's son was getting paid $50,000 a month working in a position that he had no expertise in? Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely something shady there. Now, I don't know anything about criminality. I mean, there hasn't been any evidence that there was criminality, but I think that it's the perfect, this is the perfect example of how people in positions of power will use that position to their advantage to, get these lucrative deals and positions for their family members. So does that make me sick? Absolutely. But I also think that, people who lob onto that do so as a way to deflect from the fact that we have an executive branch that's just swimming in criminality.
Yeah.
And so, for me, and by the way, like the thing that also frustrates me about Democrats is that while I think it makes perfect sense to go after what Trump did in that call with the Ukrainian president, limiting the scope of this impeachment inquiry is incredibly stupid. Because for me, potentially a bigger issue is Donald Trump's financial crimes, right? So
Absolutely.
why wouldn't they want to investigate that? And so all you can really do is speculate as to why they don't want to investigate that. And I don't know, maybe they're worried that if they investigate his financial crimes, it'll bring up their potential financial crimes. I have no idea. All I know is it's a stupid play, and it makes you question the intentions of Democratic leadership. Why is it that they're going to limit themselves by limiting the scope of this investigation?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And so my final question on this before we move on then is like, okay, if we're really going to strike the right balance, and I think you're 100% about this balance. Like I've been relatively close to you, but I'm more convinced by you specifically than anybody else in having these conversations. So we know that there's some people who are going to kind of just take us sort of like, it doesn't matter, whatever. It's all corrupt. It's all bullshit, and then ignore the fact that yes, it is all corrupt. It's all bullshit. And just like all of that matters, it matters that there's just like unending grotesque corruption and criminality in every aspect of this Trump world. Then pushing beyond that, let's, then go to the other side of it, which, okay, so they're finally going to do it. And then at first, on a practical level, they're going to limit it to this pretty narrow thing. They're not going to talk about financial crimes. They're also not going to talk about things that he will never get impeached for, but should be, like aiding a genocide in Yemen, like kidnapping and terrorizing families and children at the border. So we know that the same, impotent, ineffectual, cowardly, all of the. Every bad adjective I could use about the Democratic leadership, I will use if I could. What is the balance that we strike here in our position that you're leading on, which is like, we need to do this, actually matters. We can't just sort of fold into like a cool kid cynicism. And at the same time, we know that the people that institutionally are going to be leading this suck.
Yeah, so I want to make sure I understand your question, because on one hand, I don't think that Democratic leadership would draw attention to the issues on both sides.
Right.
They're going to go ahead and minimize the corruption issue, and they're certainly not going to make a big deal about what's going on in Yemen or what's happening at the border, because who knows, maybe in the future they're going to have a Democrat who's running who would want to do the same thing. Right. I mean, we have a history of Democratic presidents who have, not only expanded Bush-era foreign policy like Obama did, but we're unapologetic about it. So, and we're incredibly cruel to whistleblowers. Right. And that's another thing, by the way, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but, all of this rhetoric coming from mainstream media and establishment Democrats regarding protecting the whistleblower, we need to protect the whistleblower. I completely agree with that notion. But I wish that they would extend that to whistleblowers, including Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden.
Right.
You can't pick and choose which whistleblowers you want to support based on what your political agenda is at that moment. But, I do think that it's important for the naysayers on the left, the naysayers toward impeachment, to really consider the fact that we don't live in a black and white world. It is absolutely possible to be critical of the corruption on the left while simultaneously understanding the importance of pursuing this impeachment inquiry.
Yeah, I think that really was basically my question, which is like how, I guess those of us in the media or those of us making arguments, but even how somebody just might understand this issue for themselves, like that understanding why this process is justified could even be beneficial does not, it's that not black or white thinking. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you accept the utter failure of the Democratic Party and buy into that process either. It just means that you're taking on everything at once, basically.
Yeah, and I think that that's honestly what we need to do as progressives. Mm-hmm. As progressives, if we're so lopsided where we're only focusing on one issue, whether it be holding establishment Democrats accountable or only focusing on Trump, I just feel like you're not really thinking about pursuing things strategically. I know that this is a difficult fight. I know that there's a lot going on, but just think about some of the progressive voices out there who are lopsided in their coverage, who do only focus on, let's say, only attacking Democrats while ignoring the fact that Donald Trump is a hideous president who has broken laws while in office, yes, who has been brutal in his foreign policy, who has this record of allowing as many as 24 immigrants to die under his watch. I mean, like, he's a terrible person. So it's just not right to do lopsided coverage of what's going on in the world. Now, I will say, like, we do a 3-hour show. And even when we do a 3-hour show, there are days when I leave the office thinking to myself, damn it, we should have covered this. I wish we would have covered this, Democratic corruption story. I wish we would have covered this Trump story that we didn't get to. But, it's a balancing act, and it is important to kind of focus on both things strategically to kind of get what we want.
Strategically, one of the key, if we did one of those bubbles of TMBS words, that would be up there. It would be like Lula, strategically, stupid, or something.
Yeah, definitely. Or bad.
Bad. Very bad. Not ignoring Trump's crimes is very bad for you. Not good. Yeah, I mean, look, there is some level of like politics is not being a hype beast. Like, some of the stuff that is mainstream and your MSNBC wine mom is concerned about, you should be concerned about, right? Like, some of it's as simple as that. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.